Hello, everybody. Welcome to the joint virtual event series from Porchlight Book Company and Boswell Book Company. I'm Daniel Golden from Boswell. It is day 5,326 of us being in business. If you want to know more about the Boswell Book Company event program, it's at boswellbooks.com, of course. And now to introduce today's event, I give you Sally Halderson of Porchlight Book Company.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks so much. Welcome to everybody who has joined us today. We'll always give it a little bit of time for everyone to get settled. So I like to do a little bit of an introduction of our esteemed guest, and then we'll let her introduce herself as well a bit to tell us all the things we need to know. But here's something I would like to tell you all about Move Fast and Fix Things, the book that we're here to talk about today. That I think is incredibly important to tell you all from the jump. In addition to it being a functional book, Move Fast and Fix Things is a fun and funny book, a personable book. The reason I highlight this is because we, and I'm speaking about business book readers in general, don't tend to think humor and/or humanness can be found intermingled with the serious business of talking about organizational change. If we're talking about serious problems, then we better be serious. And of course, the material in Move Fast and Fix Things is serious, but it's rare for a business book to be as authentic as the authors themselves. The experience reading the book is as if you're watching one of their TED Talks or listening to their podcasts, all of the things that you should, or as I can only delightfully imagine, seated at a dinner party next to them. Within these pages is a methodology for making things better in your organization and maybe even in your life. And it's an educational and enlightening few hours highlighted with poetry references and personal anecdotes. And because I so enjoyed spending time with the authors while reading this book and am brimming with ideas to bring into my own company, I'm extra pumped to have the next hour to speak with Frances Frei directly. Welcome, Frances.
I feel so seen. That was the most beautiful introduction I have. I'm a woman of a certain age. There's been a lot of introductions. That one is the number one. So thank you, Sally.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm really excited to dig into the book, but as we want to get to know you as well, if you could introduce our attendees to your work generally and let them know what you believe they also need to know beyond what I just told them about the book.
Sure. So I'm half of the writing duo behind Move Fast and Fix Things. Ann Morris and I do all of our work together. We're also married with 2 kids, 2 dogs. And we believe meaningful change happens quickly. That is, we believe that momentum is required. And so the book is written, and we'll get into this, but it's written with a metaphor of a week, but we actually think that it does take a week, that hard problems can be solved in a week. And so this book is organized by days of the week. But it's our 3rd book together. The book prior to this, Unleashed, the Unapologetic Leader's Guide to Empowering Everyone Around You, was a new way to think about leadership. And for us, leadership is the act of making other people better. And you want to do that as a result of your presence, but the real test is, does it last into your absence? And then if we go back to the first book we wrote, Uncommon Service, How to Win by Putting Customers at the Core of Your Business, it was just that. We were seeing so many organizations with the desire to win and perhaps some misguided internal operations. And so the first book was an operations book. The second one is a maybe leadership and strategy book. And then this one, I'm going to go with fun, funny, personable, but it's the How to Get Shit Done book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit about how we accelerate getting that done as we go along. I'd like to talk a little bit, and I like to quote from the book because I do think that, the writing process is so important to our experience of reading, obviously. And you and other authors, of course, are very deliberate about book words that we use. And that is also a very important message in your books, that words matter and how we communicate matters. So if I look away, I'm trying to get my quote right. But you and open, move fast and fix things by stating something that may seem obvious, but felt really radical to me as I read it. Quote, leadership is the practice of imperfect humans leading imperfect humans. And if you accept this as a reasonable starting point, then it follows that any collection of us builds imperfect organizations. Okay, so here we are. Like, if we all agree on that, which point number one would be, do we all agree on that? Are we all able to see that? And then B, it feels to me that this is a moment that can really shift a company when you actually accept that you as a leader are imperfect, that the people you employ are imperfect, and your organization is imperfect. And that's actually a really, as you guys say, an optimistic point of view.
Deeply
Can
liberating.
you talk about that?
Deeply liberating. Yeah. So and listen, any chance we have of freeing people from the burdens of perfectionism, we take. That it is that the notion of perfectionism, I think, has done more harm than good. For all kinds of reasons that lots of other people have written about, but it really constricts us and constrains us, and it's a myth. And so if we accept that, we're like, I'm certainly imperfect. I have never been burdened by perfectionism, and I have found that it's one of my greatest advantages in the world.
Fantastic.
Harvard said no to me 5 times, as an example. And, I was sad each time, but I kept coming back. And perfectionists have a hard time with that. So not only it's a myth, but it also makes us brittle or fragile. And so when we realize and I think the quote goes on to say, and you probably had a role to play in some of that imperfection. And it is true that we want to realize that this wasn't done by like evil other people. This is well-intentioned, energetic people, don't always get it right. And that simply means there are problems that are fixable. And so let's just bring some can-do spirit and fix them.
Right. Yeah. The one of the things that I think is interesting and what is hard for leaders in particular, as you talk about this sort of perfectionism trait that some of us have. And it actually echoes a bit. My previous interview last month was with Amy Edmondson, who I believe lives nearby you.
My and neighbor, she's just right down there, and just right down there. And she's our. If your friend can be your hero, then she's both. Right. Yeah.
So she, in her most recent book, for anyone who attended the interview too, is The Right Kind of Wrong. And one of the things that she addresses in there that we talked about, and I think is really relevant to your book as well, is that you say that, or you make an effort to disabuse people of the myth that there's a trade-off between speed and excellence. And the reason why I bring Amy into, or her perspective into this, is because we talked a little bit about how hard it is for leaders to see failure or as a learning opportunity and not a mistake, or not an imperfection in a bad way, right? And instead, as long as you can learn from whatever it is that you got wrong, you're actually progressing in a way that anyone else who would stop because they were doing it wrong would be sort of stymied. And for this book as well, you're talking about, you assert that we can take care of people while going fast and pursuing excellence. And that this idea that there has to be some sort of fallout, or we have to take too much time, or we have to really feel too many things about where we're at and the mistakes we've made, really plays a part in getting stuff done.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. One is that, we wrote the book in part because the Move Fast and Break Things, which Mark Zuckerberg initiated the public declaration, but we still see it today, in all kinds of places. And it does provide a false trade-off, right? You can either move fast or you can take care of people, one or the other. And so the reason we wrote this is that we're very sad by Move Fast and Break Things, but there are 10 or 100 times as many organizations that are moving fast and breaking things that are going too slowly out of fear of moving fast and breaking things,
Yeah.
what we call responsible stewardship.
Mhm.
And so there's reckless disruption, responsible to stewardship. And to your point, there is a better way. We can move fast and fix things. We can accelerate excellence. But one of though I guess I have two comments. One is on our metaphorical week, you don't get the right to move fast until Friday. So you have to earn the right to move fast. So you got to do Monday to Thursday. If you bring the speed too early in the week, you're going to end up in reckless disruption. So there is a sequencing of it. The other part is that on the failure part and the coding of the failure, Amy and I taught together a course called Managing Service Operations back in the day, the Harvard Business School. And we did this exercise with students. It's called the electric maze, and it's just a magnificent exercise. But essentially, your goal was to find the non-beeping path through the maze. And you'd step on a square and it either beeped or it didn't beep. And what it put the position of the students in is that whenever you'd hit a beep, if it was a new beep, it should be cause for celebration because you just learned what's not on the path. But our students instinctually were very disappointed. In fact, they would literally turn their backs on the students that found the new beep. That is, they didn't distinguish between new beeps and old beeps.
Mhm.
So if you step on a beep that we already knew, that's like not a glorious failure, but a new beep is absolutely necessary. So the metaphor that we use is new beeps.
Mhm.
That if you are failing for the first time on the way to learning, I want us to not turn away. I want us to celebrate, look forward, and be grateful for it. So I would just, and maybe that phrase will help others. It certainly helps me that I have a very positive reaction to new beeps.
I love that. And for some reason, when I was reading that anecdote in the book, I was thinking about like a game show. I can think of when I was a kid and watching game shows where they had those sort of like you move down the path and if you don't get it right, you lose, right? And that's something you're trying to work against here is that.
Yeah. That's a really unfortunate metaphor.
Yeah, implanted in our brains.
It's landed in our brains. Gamification is often helpful. That one is particularly unhelpful. That's actually useful to me to know where is the root of it. I think the root was the game show.
I think it probably is part of it. Right?
Monty Hall.
I know, right? You don't get the I don't know, gravy boat or whatever it is that you were going to win in order to move on. So I want to go in two different places. I want to acknowledge that you mentioned the days of the week, and we are going to get there. We're going to talk about how this book is framed. But right before we get there, I do want to jump off a different thing that you said here. And maybe this is the big why, maybe this is sort of an existential question. But I was talking to a coworker the other day about your book, and she asked, so are they saying companies can improve just by solving problems? And it seems like a very obvious, not an obvious question, but it seems like, a question that is very sense-based. But I think it's sort of radical, right? Like we think a lot of times that we have to improve our company by creating some big strategy, by taking some big risk, by deviating from the plan in a way that would, surprise everybody. And I think of all the ways that we often think that we have to run a company. But leadership, as you say in the book about that leadership is about creating a culture where everybody can excel, then really solving problems, even maybe the heat won't go on when it snows overnight and you didn't expect it to solving a problem for a customer or solving a problem for how to access information on your internet or whatever it is, that solving problems and doing it with a really informed methodology that we'll talk about is actually a gift that you can give the people who both work for your company and get services from your company.
I like it a lot. And the way that I find solving problems as a useful metaphor is I'm on the quest of being better tomorrow than we are today. And it's an operation. So it's an operator's mindset. And
Yeah.
Amy and I are both in the technology and operations management area at Harvard. And so we we get the operators thing here. But I frame everything that is suboptimal as a problem, again, because problems are so darn fixable.
Right.
So if your good people are leaving the organization, that's a problem. If you can't get if men are getting promoted at a rate that's different than women, that's a problem. If your supply chain breaks down, that's a problem. So I do the reason that I like the problem metaphor, and we even refer to it as like the gritty. We don't like the euphemism of opportunity. No, these are problems.
They are, yeah.
They are problems.
Discomfort.
And the beautiful thing is that when we get to the other side of the problem, we're better. There's a local hero in Boston. His name is Paul English. He's one of the great inventors of our time. People might know him he was a founder of Kayak, which kind of revolutionized how you search for things. And he created that and his other dozens of companies because he experienced a problem. And his problem was that he couldn't believe how much effort he had to go to search for a flight. And he would go, and it was fatiguing and suboptimal, and it was a problem. And he used that as the fuel for innovation. So I'm of that mindset that problems are meant to be in our rear view mirror. And I look at them with delight because I know they're going to be fixable. And so, yes, will your company improve by simply solving problems? Indeed, it will.
So one of the things that I think is difficult about problems, and this is going to be my lead into how you've structured the book, is that we often get into a habit of identifying a problem or pointing at it and saying that's a problem, and then again saying that's a problem, but not knowing how to address that problem. And so you give us a framework with which to tackle problems large and small. Let's get into that.
Yeah, awesome. And so the way that we begin, and I think that the Monday, if we can start there, we say it's identify your real problem. And this is to differentiate between the symptom and the cause. So sometimes what we're experiencing as the friction, the Toyota production system famously called it, you're 5 whys away from the root cause. But why is that here? Like, let's make sure we're solving the real problem. And that's challenging enough to most organizations that we give a whole day to that, which in our real estate, that's a lot. But how do you make sure you're solving the real problem? So I'll give you an example. I was recently working with an organization, and they brought us in because they said we have a gender problem. And I am brought in often enough for gender problems that I have my gender toolkit. And I'm like, okay, let's go in. I'll just lay it out and ready to solve the gender problem. They didn't have a gender problem. They had a gender manifestation of a problem where the founder's communication style was so uncomfortably confrontational that it repelled a lot of people. It turned out it repelled all women and some men. And so it appeared as a gender problem. But all the things we know about how to fix gender problems, like, why aren't there senior women? And why can't we attract people? It's just because the women didn't want to be anywhere near this communication style. Now, these founders, lovely people, they really liked communicating. It's how they communicated with each other for decades. And it's how they treated others as they wanted to be treated because they too learned the golden rule. And as soon as we framed for them that no golden rule, treat others as they would like to be treated. Well, the communication challenge, so once we solved that, they no longer had a gender problem. And so that's why it's important to figure out the root of the problem. Because if we did all of the typical things we do to solve a gender problem, we would have had no return on that effort. So Monday is getting super clear about the real problem.
Right. And I think one of the things that, I mean, this is a little bit going back to the beeps and sort of your endurance for getting no's, or all of our ways that we tend to identify a problem and maybe not be curious about if it's
Magical
the
word.
problem. And
Magical
so that's
word,
the
curiosity.
one I highlighted here is
Yeah.
curiosity, and that curiosity doesn't play well with judgment.
Yes.
And that was like, I want to put that on my computer.
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I learned that from Francesca Gino, a dear colleague who, and what's beautiful about that is that we find ourselves in positions of judgment, and there's a way out, which is to invite in curiosity. But it's a deliberate effort, because especially under time pressure, we just get into the judging, and we lose our, and so curiosity is like opening the aperture. And a beautiful side effect of curiosity is it repels judgment. And so it is a deliberate choice. I find that we're instinctually quite judgmental, and but when we invite in curiosity, there are so many wonderful things that happen. In addition to, we lose the limiting constraints of getting into the defensive crouch or the offensive crouch of judgment.
So we can stop for just a brief moment and say, I think everybody who is attending and will read the book can also understand that we can apply this to many aspects of our lives and not just our organizations, right? Yes. We are employing judgment and closure much of the time rather than curiosity.
Yes, and often harshly to ourselves. So.
Right. Yeah. First off, right?
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that I think is very, for people who are dedicated to personal development and really looking at how to better their own lives, there's also an application to this framework there too, because we often misidentify the problems that we actually are facing, right? Yes. So like you were talking about being rejected 5 times, if you think about, submitting a manuscript or trying out for a play and you get a no each time, and you think, well, it just must be me. And that's, going back to Amy's book again, where we really need to assess for more options than it's just me that's the problem.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really good.
One of the things I have come to understand is that I don't let the decisions of mortals influence my life's trajectory. Again, back to the imperfect people leading. Yeah. So that someone happened, like that it ended up somebody said no to me, and then I just came back stronger. But I'm gonna let that, like, who knows if they had a full breakfast? Who knows what was going on there?
They needed another cup of coffee.
The notion that I was gonna let that influence my life's trajectory, but we do it all the time because we're like, oh, it must be me. Oh, I think it's a signal. And so I want us to be more resilient and determined than that. And I wouldn't let the decisions of mortals influence our lives' trajectory. None of us.
Yet something else that we need to remind ourselves every day. Yeah. So speaking of days, we'll go back. So the framing of the book is a work week. Let's be specific. It's a Monday through Friday.
Yeah, you got to take the weekend off.
Very specific.
Rest. Yeah.
About rest. So on Tuesday, so after we've determined what the actual problem is, on Tuesday, it's a big one, solve for trust.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So at the end of Tuesday, you're going to have your first draft of the plan, what we call a good enough plan. And we're very clear, not a perfect plan, a good enough plan. And what's going to be true is that your problem is going to be between or among people, groups of people. And if it's a problem, trust is broken down. And so what we want you to do is to rebuild trust at the center of the problem. Now, we covered this a lot in Unleashed on how to do it. We did it in Unleashed at the personal level, at the individual level, and here we do it at the organizational level. It still has the same trust architecture. You are more likely to trust me if you experience my authenticity, logic, and empathy, all 3 at the same time. So we just bring that to the organizational level. And so on Tuesday, you're going to rebuild trust. And there's a myth about trust that is, takes a lifetime to build, a moment to lose. It can never be as strong again. None of those things are true. They all sound
Oh.
great, but none of them are true. It does
Refreshing.
not take a lifetime to build. You can rebuild it to be as strong or stronger than it was before. So we just, the fortune cookie wisdom around trust is not true. Trust is not a Fabergé egg.
Mhm.
If you look around, there is trust. We're rebuilding trust all the time, sometimes because we broke it. And I often think about when I break trust, I just turned around and I sideswiped something with my tail. Just accidentally, I knocked something over. It's how I respond to that. I can totally bring it back up. So what is that Japanese konsagi, or it's something where if you put gold in, if a vase breaks, you put
Yep.
it back
It's
together,
actually
it's
stronger.
more beautiful and
Mhm.
stronger. That it's trust is not a Fabergé egg. It's that. I should probably remember what that is, since that's the metaphor that I think.
I actually think I learned about that on the British Bake Off.
Yeah.
They were talking about something that broke, and
Yes. Yeah. So I think that it's and you can do all of these things quickly. There is time does not help trust. If you are ineffective, it will take a long time. But if you know precisely how to do it, trust, like so many other things, is much better addressed in the moment and quickly. So on Tuesday, your good enough plan is with certainty going to involve restoring the trust that was broken in your Monday problem. And so we go and address that with the can-do spirit we have for everything else.
So let's stop here for a moment and say that there is something that may be disorienting for people, that you're thinking Monday, Tuesday, I'm supposed to restore trust in one day. That's not the goal here, right? These are not, some problems obviously could be fixed in 5 literal days, but in terms of where we're going, we're talking figuratively, correct?
Although, yes, we are. Having said that, Min Peng, Kintsugi, thank you.
Nice.
Wow, wonderful. The wisdom of the crowds. I appreciate it.
Fantastic.
I would say yes, it's a metaphorical week, and I think that you don't need a week to solve some problems, and you definitely don't need a year to solve any problem. So we stuff this metaphorical week into much too long of constraints. So let's say you don't want to do it in a week. What I would say is it's probably not going to take more than 8 concentrated hours, but you might want to spread out those 8 hours into various conversations. But we would like you to think closer to a week than a year is the right amount of time. That is, people give, like, our culture is broken. What's our multi-year effort to change it? You've already failed. What is your 3-month plan to change it? You have a chance of succeeding. So we do want to bring
That's fantastic.
the urgency that our problems demand, because our problems are harming people.
Right.
We want there to be urgency associated with it. So yes, it's true. It's not a day, a metaphorical day, but it's not that off.
I think what is so effective about it is that it does sort of hearken back to how we think of time, how humans think of time. We think of projects in terms of weeks. We think about it in that way. So I think it really does help you move, taking those steps forward, right? And put you in that mindset that you're actually in a progressive mindset. And I think that works really well. So now we're on Wednesday.
Yeah.
And Wednesday is Make New Friends. And this chapter is loaded. There is so much information in here that I probably have too many notes. But I think the 2 things that I think are really interesting to highlight, lightly, is that when we talk, it's a fairly known fact that we tend to gravitate toward like-thinking people, right?
We really like people who are really like us. We really do.
Super reaffirming.
Yeah.
And this is a call to not do that thing. So how is it, if this is something that we are all really accustomed to, and again, we see it in our personal lives, we see it in like greater society, where we are a really comfortable belonging, which is a core, need for people. How do we shake this? How do we get out of this?
So I would One is to rest assured that the more range of people you have, the better. So Kintsugi didn't come from you, it didn't come from me, but it did come from Min Peng, who just happens to be here and telling us, doing that. The wisdom of a diverse crowd, a wisdom of variety is exquisite. So because we really like people who are really like us, chances are our collective aperture is not a lot wider than my individual aperture. And if I want the peripheral vision, if I want to see opportunity, we need the upper envelope of all of our apertures. So the metaphor we use here is whatever problem you're solving, bring the usual suspects around the table, the senior team or whoever it is, and always have 3 or 4 empty chairs. And point to the chairs quite physically and say, who's missing?
Right.
Whose view? So I'll just tell you, like just recently, I was in a conversation at HBS, super well-intentioned senior faculty, having another conversation about junior faculty. We love and adore and commit ourselves to junior faculty. And year after year after year, we're not very effective. And why? Because it's only senior faculty talking about junior faculty. If only we would bring the empty chair and say, who's missing in this conversation? It's the junior faculty that are missing in the conversation. And they could help us take our good enough plan of Monday and make it an even better plan. So what we want to do when we say make new friends, it's add who's not at the table. And I guarantee you, there are people of importance, like maybe regulators, maybe customers, maybe frontline employees, maybe people on the supply chain, maybe investors. Like there are people that are missing from whatever the relevant context is. So one, include them, like invite them to the table, but then how do you also include their voice? How are you inclusive of them? Turns out that there's a secret memo on how to be inclusive, that if you just bring people in, particularly if they have a different power dynamic, or if they're othered in some way, if you just invite them in, you may get their silence or their parroting of what we would have said. How do we get their unique perspective? Well, that turns out to be a skill that we can teach, that we show you in the book how to do it, and we call it the inclusion dial. But it's the 4-step process of how do you make sure that the voice of the people you brought to the table is there, because that's what you need.
The inclusion dial was so informative to me, and one of the things that I really appreciated about it is, obviously, in this chapter, you also address DEI and lots of the big important issues that so many companies are struggling with. But one of the things that the inclusion dial does is it tells us that it sort of meets us where we are, and it tells us that we can work on inclusion where we're at, right? Like we don't need maybe we can't perform a huge overhaul of our company structure in order to fit these big goals that we might have, but we can work on making sure that everyone who is in the company currently feels included, because then that cultivates the soil in which bringing new people in for them to be free to
and
to
what
develop.
we have found, and this is from my operations mindset, if you get good at inclusion, no new people, no new technology, and you can improve performance by several 100%. Like it is astounding. Said differently, there's so many people with such great ideas that are silent because they're not feeling included. And if you can surface all of that beauty, there is so much advantage to be gained. So if you're, let's say like you're stressed, you don't have any more budget, you can't hire any more people, you can't spend in technology, become more inclusive of the voices that are already there. And I promise you, you will wildly accelerate performance. And so that's why, like, why did this operator come to the topic of inclusion? I came to it from the performance boost. I stayed for the humanity, but I arrived for the performance.
And there's so much more in this chapter about performance, and then how I think one of the reasons people fear bringing in a lot of voices is they feel like that actually slows down fixing problems rather than speeds it up. And you talk about that here. or within the book, but we should move on to Thursday.
Okay,
So
let's
we
go to
don't get
Thursday.
too stuck on this. This is as a storyteller, this is my favorite day. Tell a good story. And I will first ask you what that looks like, but also say that I think, especially for someone like me, a lot of people start here. A lot of people rush to Thursday, don't they? Like they want to tell the story that's in their head
before doing the work. So I
Yeah.
find two things happen. Either you go to Thursday prematurely, or you skip Thursday because you don't have time.
Oh.
And so you come up with the plan and you just start executing it, and you wonder why you didn't get buy-in from the organization. And it's because you didn't honor Thursday. So I think we have to honor Thursday as the fourth step and a step not to be skipped for it. And so what makes a good story? I think of it, I come at it in two ways. One is that I feel like a story has the past, present, and future. So a good story reconciles this. Particularly, we're telling about how to tell a good story in the context of change, in the context of fixing. So then the past really does matter. There might be some stories that are just in the future, but we're reconciling the past and the future. So we find that a mistake that people make in telling stories is that they don't honor the past. So they might come in and say, like, I'm new and I'm here and the past was bad and I'm good and I'm the hero. And then everyone that was here in the past is like, I'm not listening to you. So we have to honor the past, both the good and the bad of it. So we have to honor the past. And that word, I think, is chosen very carefully. We then need a clear and compelling change mandate, and that's the present. But it's the, why do I have to change now? Couldn't I change next week? Next month would be a lot more. Next quarter,
a little busy.
Next year, I'm a little busy. The next 3 to 5 year planning cycle. Like now is never the right time. Even, oh yes, that change is a very good idea. But why now? And that's, I think, the present. And for that, we have to be crystal clear and compelling. And so I joke that if you're a retailer, Walmart opens up next door, clear and compelling. That's the why now. Well, we have to provide as clear and compelling a change mandate for why now, or else people will indulge you, but they're not going to go along with you. So that's part two. So it's the honor the past, the why now. And then if you want them to like come with you to the future, we know two things that you have to describe about the future. It's got to be super rigorous. And it also has to be optimistic. So it can't be, oh, the future is going to be great. How do you know? Just, faith-based. No.
It'll be better than now. Yeah.
Nor can it be, oh, things are so bleak. And I know it for sure. Like nobody's going to come for your pessimism. So your story isn't complete until you have worked on it enough that you have a rigorous and an optimistic way forward. So when you have those three parts to it, that's what makes a good story. Now, what makes a transferable story? So this is a good story. And now how can I transfer it? I have to describe it as simply as possible. And that my job is to understand all of that stuff so deeply that I can describe it simply. And now here's the test of storytelling. If I describe it to you, Sally, and Sally, you go and describe it to Min, does Min understand it as if I described it to them? If so, then it is transferable. So my job is to understand it so deeply that I can describe it to you in a simple way that you can turn around and with full fidelity describe it to someone else. And that's necessary because yes, I have to repeat myself a lot, but I also can't be in every conversation where it's discussed, and we want it to echo and reverberate in the right way.
Excellent. I have so many follow-up questions, but we'll move into Friday because we're going fast to fix things. So on Friday, it is all about going fast. Okay, so we have done our preparatory work and we've told the story, and now you say very compellingly to start the chapter, there is such a thing as being too late.
Yeah, a quote from Dr. King. Yeah.
So let's talk about that in terms of how do you sort of unleash the speed once you have sort of gotten the buy-in, your story's transferable. Now you've got the potential for forward momentum. What do we do?
So what we do with it is we remove all of the off ramps that well-intentioned people are going to offer us. So, so for sure, whenever we're doing things, people are going to be like, Psst, we're doing a lot. Maybe you should trim back what we're doing.
Yeah.
Psst, we're really busy. Why don't you take a little longer? So really well-intentioned people are going to try to seduce us into doing less and taking longer. And I think you just want to close down the doing less exit on the freeway and close down the taking longer. And here's why I feel so confident about this recommendation. We have sampled on the dependent variable of people who have been wildly successful, and no one has ever, ever, ever told us, I wish I had done less, or I wish I had taken more time. And yet, we were faced with it at every turn. Well-intentioned people are going to pull you aside and say, for the good of others, not for me, but for the good of others, do less, take longer. And so that's just the advice we have to discard. So that's the number one thing on Friday is close down those ramps. Now, there's another thing to be able to go fast. It means we have to have radical prioritization. Like if I'm going to go fast on this, it means I'm not going full speed ahead on some other things. And we find that, and this is where organizations' bad habits, we got to clean them up. So like an organization that is trying to be great at everything, which sounds so good and so well-intentioned, but only leads to exhausted mediocrity. Well, on Friday, you have to say, here are the things we're going to get better at. And here are the things we're not going to work on. And you have to have that radical prioritization. There are some organizations that they use different metaphors, but they call the project an ambulance project, or they give it like some code name that this is the thing we're going to work on above others. So I think that we have to close down the off ramps. We have to give it radical prioritization. And then I would say that one other part of this is that in general, organizations are working on way too many things. So if I look at people's schedules and I see they have back-to-back meetings, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they must be doing so many important things. Oh no. They're doing so many things. But if I, in retrospect, I ask them to cross off all of the things that weren't necessary to what you produced, they cross off 3/4 of the meetings that they were in. 3/4 of them. Now they had the benefit of hindsight. Well, that's what we want to have is the intentionality going forward of the benefit of hindsight. And this is a lesson that we learned from Little's Law, but it's essentially, we have far too much work in process in the system. We're doing too many things because we start things, but we typically don't stop them. We're doing far too many things and it's slowing down everything else. So we gotta get rid of the non-value added stuff. So I want radical prioritization of the value added activities, and I want exorcism of the non-value added activities.
And I think one of the other things that I highlighted there, and I do want to touch really quickly on meetings, as you just brought up, but you also mentioned that, or you write about empowerment, right? And a leader's sort of responsibility to know when you're not needed. And so to be able to, or when you would create the bottleneck by having,
I think it's the latter, right? So if I want to empower, if I want things to go fast, I can't be the bottleneck to it. Like imagine if all decisions had to go through me and I'm a big company. Well, then we're going to have to go only at the pace I can make. It's much better to decentralize decision-making. And then I'm not the bottleneck. So you want to remove the bottleneck. And, you know, a great, like, it sounds like a little woo-woo, but, you know, the military is the one where we have learned the most about this, where it's life or death. And they've learned that you can't let all decisions go through a single person, that you actually have to decentralize control and decentralize the command in order to save lives on the battlefield. And so the same thing happens in organizations. We have to remove the bottlenecks. And one of them is when we reserve too much power for ourselves. And, you know, for Unleashed, the opening quote that we had was from Toni Morrison. And it was, once you get that power you so richly deserve, Your job is to turn around and empower someone else.
Mhm.
And she said it with such nobility. I'm going to say it with such practicality, so that you don't slow everything the heck down.
Mhm. The another way that I think people assume we get slowed down, as you already touched on, are with meetings. And I find meetings to be interesting to talk about because everybody has an opinion about meetings, and everyone has maybe an opinion about their value, depending on whether you're running it or whether you're participating in it or whether you feel heard when you're in one. But I felt like, correct me if I'm wrong, you defend the meeting to some degree, right? Like really efficient,
Yes.
good meetings are good.
Work
So
gets
how do
done.
we get there?
Yeah. So I'll just give you a couple of teasers for how to run good meetings. I'm not saying you should have no meetings. I am a defender of meetings. But I'm not a defender that all people have to be live at all meetings. So for example, first of all, if a meeting doesn't have an agenda, I think that it's going to be a bad meeting. Just going to go ahead and say that. So when we have our agenda for the meeting, like let's say that you're having a meeting and it's not something that I'm central to, and I'm probably not going to need to speak, but you want me for informational purposes. Well, there's no reason for me to attend it live. Record it. Have the recording available for 24 hours so that you don't have to let go of the secrets of the organization, and invite me to watch it on 1.5 speed.
Right.
You just saved me now instead of an hour. I get to do it in a subset of an hour, and I don't have to be looking at my monitor. In fact, encourage me to go for a walk so I can take care of the health part of it while listening to the meeting on 1.5 speed. I promise you I'll retain more. I won't be multitasking while I'm doing it. So I love meetings, but let's be clear about their purpose, and let's be clear about who needs to be there. And when you have achieved your purpose, please don't say, does anyone have anything else? No, no, no. When we've gone through the agenda before the meeting is supposed to be over, congratulate everyone and give them the most valuable thing you can give them, which is their time back.
That's a lesson that I am taking away from this book, among many others. But I think that for many of us, the sort of newly hybrid state that we're in, and what we're learning about the science behind that in terms of what people learned over COVID, among many things, is the desire to have control over your time. And we are more and more aware of that now in a way that we weren't before.
And hopefully we'll never, ever give it all back and give all that control back to any organization. I hope we never do.
And so that brings us to the weekend. And we'll of course, reflect on our week here. But you remind us that moving fast only comes if you're not exhausted.
Yes. And
why did you guys take time to talk about this?
Yeah, because all of the research on people that on optimal performance, on peak performance, says that the important stuff happens during recovery. Recovery isn't for the weak. Recovery is for the world class. So we wanted to reframe who needs rest and recovery. The Olympic athletes. The weekend warriors, maybe they don't need rest and recovery because if you're going to be at optimal performance, your muscles grow while you sleep and while you recover. So we're all about peak performance, and we honor and cherish the recovery that's needed. And the 5 days on, 2 days off felt pretty good, particularly, and as does 8 hours of sleep after a solid work day. So we think nights and weekends are to be protected if you want to be at peak performance. Now, if you're going to go for exhausted mediocrity, you can go ahead and work around the clock. But if you want to thump the competition, you need to take nights and weekends off.
And I think this circles us back to the beginning when we were talking about that trade-off between speed and excellence. And just generally speaking, we have this assumption that if I work at something for 12 hours, it's going to be a better thing than if I worked on it for 4 hours. And what we need to maybe understand is that that super powered 4 hours is actually really worth more than 12.
Oh my gosh, it's worth so much more. It's worth so much more. But you only get there with like deliberate, intentional design. And so let's do all of that intentional design, which means if you're going to all of these meetings that are badly run and you're just are sitting there like dulling your head, and if you're on Zoom, you can turn the camera off maybe so that people don't have to see it. But in person, you just have to like prop yourself up. It's so all of these things, like for peak performance, let's give ourselves like we find when we work with organizations, they spend 50% too long in meetings. That's typical. So if you spend 8 hours in meetings a day, optimal for you is 4 hours. That's how much inefficiency is in the system that doesn't lose any quality. In fact, quality goes up in the absence of that. And so when we clear out that gunk, which could be, it's a great meeting for you. I'm going to listen to it at 1.5 speed, and I just cleared it up for me.
Right.
When we clear up all of that, we will perform better. And I know of very few things where 12-hour stretch is better than a peak 4-hour stretch. Very few things.
What's so exciting to me about having these conversations and having these books is, as we've already mentioned, Amy Edmondson's book, and I had the pleasure of talking with Susan Cain, who obviously does a ton of writing about quiet and introduced us to acceptance of introversion.
Changed my life. It made me, I came out of that closet when I read that.
And then this year I talked to one of the authors of Sensitive, which is again
another one for the
and I think that one of the things that we're talking about here in this week is identifying sort of multiple ways with which to speak to groups. As you said, this is about leading organizations, leading groups, and recognizing the fact that, I'm someone who I don't do terribly well extemporaneously speaking about something. I like to have some time, like give me the problem and I'll go home and I'll think about it for a couple days and I'll come back with a thing. But just to like rattle off something in a meeting is very difficult for me. And so I think if we build in opportunities for people to bring their best selves, really where that, again, we gain speed by offering options for people to work at optimal pace.
I can't help but give a plug for my friend's book, Matt Abrahams, who is, if you want to get better at contemporaneously, it's how do you do better on demand? Like if you get cold called, if you get asked. So he calls it think faster, talk smarter. It's unbelievable recipe for if you find yourself in that situation. There's actually 5 things you can do.
Oh, interesting.
I'm with you. I'd much rather prepare. And his book is just out for like 2 weeks. He's got a podcast called Think Fast, Talk Smart. I think he just added ER on the name. So Think Faster, Talk Smarter for the book. But it does tell you that for spontaneous, for that spontaneity, there are practices that can help us, which is like the whole set of books. And what I love about both of these organizations that are sponsoring this is that these books, if we get them curated, and I need them curated, Sally, because I can't, like all those books on the shelves, I got to go and take a nap. But when you curate them for me, as you do, and I get to read them, they have a chance of changing my life. And that's the thing I so appreciate about it.
We believe in books, that is, and this book has all the capability of making so much change. Just like I know that you and Anne get opportunities to parachute into companies and really bring some radical change to them. But this is a way for us to have you parachute into our own companies and give us that little bit of a framework with which to make our companies better through fixing problems. And that is, we have Okay, we've got a few minutes left. So I'm going to ask this one last question.
Great.
And it's not what kind of dogs you have, even though I'm dying to know, because I have two as well. But my last question is really what brings you to the study of leadership? Like what is it
Yeah, nice question.
That drives you to help
Yeah.
us?
You know, I started as a math major in college, and then I got my PhD in operations management, which just meant I could optimize anything, but the pesky people were always getting in the way. If it weren't for the people, I could optimize it. And so they were like just annoying. And then I was like, huh, that's actually everything. And the people are led in their humanity. And so then I was like, oh, you can't optimize. And it's no longer the pesky people. Now it's the magnificence of the humanity of all of these things. But I came to it reluctantly. They were in the way of all of my beautiful optimization. And they were in the way often enough that I became pretty obsessed with. And so that's what brings me to leadership. I believe that people are the most important. I think they're more important than technology. I think they're more important. It, to me, is the only thing. If you invest in people, I'm going to round it off to you can get infinite returns for it. And so the increasing returns from the investment there, I just think it's magnificent. And so I'm still interested in the technology and the rest of it, but the thing that was the annoyance is actually the superpower.
Thank you so much for that. That is a wonderful way to wrap up our hour together. I have enjoyed it immensely, as much as I expected. And thank you so much for the book. Thank you for joining us. And, have fun with this book out in the world. I'm sure you will.
Yeah. And thank you for, you've read the book, you've honored, like the same way you do for every book in your library, you do for these individual ones. And from a book lover, it really is, you're doing us all a great service because we can't read all the books. And you help us have the wisdom to know the difference. And so I really appreciate it.